The fear of panic attacks can become a challenge when we're going through recovery. It can become a barrier when we're trying to do therapy, but trying to avoid panic attacks, trying to avoid that challenge is part of the problem. It is not the solution. And so hopefully this video will give you some ideas about ways that you can overcome that panic attack challenge if it's getting in the way. First up, I want to share a video with you. This comes from Stephen C. Hayes. It's a TEDx talk he gave recently. You've probably seen me sharing about his work before. He has created so many useful tools for taking care of our mental health. He is the researcher that developed acceptance and commitment therapy. And in this talk he gave recently on psychological flexibility, I've linked to it here and down below in the description, he shares about his experience with panic attacks. The reason I think this talk is so important is not only because he's sharing about psychological flexibility, which I think is a very important thing to understand and to promote, but also because he tells this story of a time when he went to the hospital because he thought he was having a heart attack and they had to tell him at the hospital, nah, you're just having a panic attack. It is great to have a therapist, a researcher, a superstar in the psychology field talking about these things. Everybody has mental health. Panic attacks don't have to be a barrier to improving and maintaining your mental health. Hayes has used his experience with panic attacks to develop amazing techniques like acceptance and commitment therapy that can help us overcome these issues. So check out that video, share it around. There's some really useful ideas there, and hopefully some ideas that you can continue to explore and understand how to practice them in your own life. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention here is what I tell people about panic attacks when they ask, whether it's clients and we're working on some intense exercises, or it's just generally people asking about panic attacks online and trying to figure out how to get over panic attacks so they can do the things they want to do in life. So typically something like this will happen. So we'll plan out an exercise to not engage in a compulsion, but instead to do something healthy that's aligned with that person's values. And then that person will say, if I do that though, I'm gonna have a panic attack. To which I say, yes, that is awesome. Let's hope it is huge. I remember I used to have these panic attacks where I would just have overwhelming waves of anxiety and I wouldn't be able to move and my heart would be pounding and I'd be breathing funny. I'd have difficulty breathing and all the sounds would be strange and my mind would just be racing through all these apocalyptic scenarios. Let's hope that happens. And then they probably go something like this. What? And here's why I say things like that. First of all, I think it's important not to see panic attacks as a separate disorder. I often see people saying things like, I also deal with panic attacks, so that makes doing therapy for anxiety very difficult or impossible. That's like saying, I struggle with mobility, so I want to do yoga, but I can't do yoga because I'm not very flexible. It's all part of the same challenge. When it comes to your mental health, you only have one brain. So I find it really helps to tackle these issues holistically as mental health, not as a bunch of separate disorders in their own little silo that we have to tackle separately that interfere with each other separately. The other thing to keep in mind is that there are natural consequences to exerting ourselves physically or mentally. Sometimes we've been pushed into exerting ourselves. And so there's a lot of negative baggage around that because we didn't want to do it. We were forced into it. Or maybe there are situations or thoughts or feelings that we've avoided because they're difficult to handle, but now because we've avoided them, they become even more difficult. And so there's a lot of negative baggage around that, and we try to avoid them even more. But mental health is like physical health. If you avoid sweating, eventually everything makes you sweat. If you avoid anxiety, eventually everything makes you anxious. Avoiding panic attacks does not lead to fewer panic attacks. Avoiding panic attacks leads to more panic attacks. For so long, I had perceived the emotional and the physical, the mental sensations of panic attacks as things that had to be avoided at all costs. That the moment I started to sense there was even the possibility, the slightest possibility of one of those experiences coming on, I had to quickly avoid things, shut things down, and get out of there. But what I realized is that's no different than if I wanted to improve my cardiovascular health, but the moment I noticed myself sweating, I thought, oh, okay, I have to stop this. Like, sweating is very bad. It must stop. It is done. It is over. Of course, if you want to improve your cardiovascular health and you stop exercising the moment you start to sweat, you don't improve your cardiovascular health. In fact, it'll get worse and worse. So the tip I always give to people is to approach that panic attack or that anxiety or whatever you want to call it as something that you want to have happen. Right? Something, an experience that you are intentionally creating as part of the work you're doing to maintain and improve your mental health, to cut out compulsions. We improve our mental health and fitness the same way we improve our physical health and fitness. If you approach exercise with the intention of avoiding exhaustion, of avoiding failure, then it is not strange to not make progress. But when you intentionally welcome those feelings while following a structured program with a professional, learning how to cut out compulsions, learning how to do the things you actually value, then it becomes very possible to make progress as you learn how to do the things that make you healthy and happy over the long term.